Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Dark Reading webinar, Cyber Attack Evasion Techniques, sponsored by Deep Instinct and broadcast by Informa. I'm Eric Bruno with Dark Reading, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar on social media, and take part in Q&A at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You can also download a copy of the slides via the Resources widget. At the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please fill this out before leaving us today. Your feedback will help provide us with valuable information to improve future events. Finally, if you experience any technical issues, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen or type your issue into the Q&A area. Now on to the presentation, Cyber Attack Evasion Techniques. Discussing today's topic is Guy Proper, Threat Intelligence Team Leader at Deep Instinct. Guy is the leader of the Threat Intelligence Team at Deep Instinct with a wealth of experience in the cybersecurity world. Guy has several years of experience in an elite technological operational unit in the intelligence department of the Israeli Defense Force. Guy, over to you.
Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Guy Proper, and I'm the team leader of the Threat Intelligence Team at Deep Instinct. And today I would like to talk to you about malware evasion techniques. I'd like to first present the agenda for today. I'll start the presentation with a basic introduction to evasion techniques. I'll explain them at a high level. And then from that, I would like to move on and provide specific examples from the field for these evasion techniques. These examples will all focus on recent and highly sophisticated malware that was caught by Deep Instinct in different customer sites around the world. Following that, I would like to talk a bit about the fact that this whole area of evasion techniques is essentially a cat and mouse game between attackers and defenders, because as defenders innovate, so do attackers, and vice versa. And I'll discuss some of the main trends that we see in that area. And I'd like to finish off by explaining how you can protect yourself and your organization from evasion techniques and from malware in general. So I'd like to start with a quick and high-level introduction to evasion techniques. Some of these will be discussed with specific examples later in the presentation. I'd like to start off with the anti-detection category of evasion techniques. This category of evasion techniques, as its name implies, is aimed at avoiding detection by security products. There are different types of evasion techniques. Some of them aim to avoid detection. Some of them aim to avoid analysis by analysts and by security products. And again, I'd like to start off with some anti-detection techniques. So the first technique is injection. The definition of this technique is injection of malicious content into benign processes in order to avoid detection by security solutions. And I'd like to provide some more specific examples for this technique. I'm sure at least some of you know the terms. The first is DLL injection. This is a very basic technique. It allows you to execute your own malicious DLL under another process. It can be a benign process, or it can be anything that you create with a benign-looking name to avoid detection by security products. However, if you use, as an attacker, if you use this technique, then the DLL that you want to inject into a benign process has to be stored on disk. This is a serious drawback of this technique, because placing the DLL on disk means it will be scanned by almost all or all security products. So this technique is not so relevant in today's world. However, we do see it very widely used still by many types of malware. A second example for an injection technique is a technique called reflective DLL injection. This technique allows you to load a DLL from memory into another process. So in this technique, you don't have to have your DLL saved on disk, which is a very big improvement compared to the previous technique. This allows you to evade some security solutions that don't check running processes or memory of a computer to check for malware. The third technique is called process hollowing. In this technique, you also don't have to have your DLL saved to disk. You can do it from memory. And again, at a high level, this technique allows you to hollow a process, basically empty its content, and then put your malicious content into it, and then run it. And then, of course, this is just an example. There are more advanced techniques. For example, a technique called process doppelganging and a technique called atom bombing. If you want to get more details on each of these techniques, then on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see Deep Instinct published a blog post about all of these techniques and actually some more techniques, and it provides very, very specific details on how to execute these techniques and on what malware we saw using them. So feel free to visit our blog and read more. The next technique I'd like to talk about, this is also an anti-detection technique. It's called living off the land. This has been spoken a lot about in the past at least 2 years, and it's becoming more and more common in malware written by cyber criminals. Several years back, it was mainly used by nation-state attackers. However, cyber criminals have become more and more sophisticated, and now they're also starting to use evasion techniques such as this. The definition of living off the land is abusing either built-in Microsoft Windows capabilities or trusted tools. The definition is a bit confusing. It can be either Microsoft Windows tools or other completely different tools which are trusted by specific organizations, and this is done to perform malicious actions, of course. Examples for living off the land techniques of some tools that are being abused by attackers. The first and most common example is PowerShell. This is being used by probably most of the malware in the threat landscape in the past year, maybe even more. This is a built-in Windows tool which is intended for administrative uses mostly. However, it offers very far reach into the operating system, and it's pretty easy to learn and use. So malware attackers use it very, very often in order to run malicious code. And sometimes malware can be written completely in PowerShell, which means it's much harder for security solutions to detect it, since this is only a script file and not more traditional file-based malware. Another example is WMI. This is Windows Media Instrumentation. It's another common built-in Microsoft Windows tool. It allows you to query and run operations on the operating system. It's also a very far-reaching tool. For example, it allows you to create scheduled tasks, which are the next example provided here. Scheduled tasks are also built-in Windows tools. And malware can use this in order to, for example, persist or schedule a specific check or a run of itself on system startup, or if anything else happens. And that's also hard for users and security solutions to detect. Of course, it's possible. All of these things are possible to detect. However, they go much further than the basic level of malware. Another example, which is very common, is the abuse of sysinternals tools. These are very, very common administrative tools, such as Process Monitor, PSExec. There are lots of examples here. These are also frequently used by malicious actors in order to collect data and perform malicious actions. And then there are many other examples which are not provided here because they can be pretty much endless. Another point that I'd like to focus on is that this is not limited only to Microsoft Windows tools. For example, let's say that a malware attacker wants to target and attack a financial organization, and this organization has some sort of program that it uses in order to manage its internal network or manage its finances. And through this program, you can maybe perform administrative actions such as access systems or run scripts. then if the attacker knows you use this program, it can abuse it as well in order to run malicious actions on your system. This is something that we see more and more, and it's especially common in targeted attacks against specific organizations. And again, Deep Instinct also published a blog on this subject. If you want more details and more specific examples, you're welcome to visit the blog. The last technique that I'd like to focus on in the introductory section, actually it's two techniques, anti-virtualization and anti-sandbox techniques. There is one big difference between these two techniques and the techniques I mentioned in the slides before. It is that these techniques are aimed at avoiding analysis and not so much at avoiding detection. In most cases, these malware authors who use these techniques assume that the malware has already been detected, and now they're trying to make it look not malicious or make it perform different actions when it's analyzed either automatically or by an analyst. And then they're trying to make life as difficult as possible for the analyst looking at them to make the analysis take as much time as possible, because if the analysis will take a very, very long time, then the analyst might just, give up on it and move to the next malware that he found, and then this malware will not be analyzed and will not be detected in other campaigns around the world. So some examples for these techniques are presented here in the slide. For anti-virtualization, there are many techniques. I just provided a few examples here in the slide. The first is process name checks. Malware can check if specific processes are running inside the machine that it infected in order to see if this machine is a virtual machine, because some virtual machines, if they're not modified, they run very, very specific processes. And again, there are also specific registry values and specific MAC addresses which are indicative to virtual machines. All of these can be modified. However, in most cases, in the default virtual machines, they are not modified, and then malware will not run on these machines. And then I'd like to move on to the second category of anti-sandbox techniques. Sandboxes are more automatic compared to virtual machines, which are more based on manual analysis. There is also one more important point here, is that a sandbox could be an enhanced type of virtual machine which performs automatic analysis. And again, there are several techniques here which can also apply to virtual machines. The first is a time delay. This means that the malware delays its execution to avoid analysis. This is because sandbox machines usually run for a specific amount of time, for example, 2 minutes. So if the malware, once it is on the machine, sleeps for 5 minutes and only then runs, then the sandbox won't be able to analyze it. The malware can also perform checks to see if a user was active on this machine. For example, if the mouse is moving, if there are any recent files, if the desktop resolution is specific for a virtual machine or a sandbox or not. And then it can also perform anti-research checks. This means that the malware checks specific lists of research-related processes, for example, Wireshark, Procmon, and there are many other processes that can be given as examples here. This ends the first, the introductory part of the presentation, and now I'd like to move on to examples from the field. As I said in the beginning of the presentation, these are all examples that were caught in Deep Instinct customer sites, and Deep Instinct was the first to analyze and publish on this malware. This is also all available in our blog, and in our blog there are many more details on each of the campaigns that I'll discuss here. What I'd like to focus on here is for each of the campaigns, I'll provide an overview of the campaign and explain the risk if this campaign was not prevented. And then I'd like to provide examples of what evasion techniques we saw in this campaign. So I'd like to start off with a campaign called Legion Loader. Legion Loader is a dropper, which is very advanced and can drop many different kinds of malware as payloads. You can see on the right-hand side examples of the malware that we saw dropped by Legion Loader when we analyzed it. These are mostly information stealers. However, we also have a backdoor here and a miner. And we are sure that the malware dropped by Legion Loader is not limited just to these samples, but could also be more types of malware. As I said before, Deep Instinct was the first to analyze and publish details on this specific Legion Loader campaign. And the risk of this, if it is not prevented in customer sites, is very obvious. This is a dropper which can download and run many, many different kinds of malware. So it basically, if it is present in an organization's network, it leaves it open to many additional threats which can run on its network. This could be ransomware, spyware, or anything else the Legion Loader chooses to download and execute. When we analyzed this campaign, we saw several evasion techniques. Some are provided as examples here. I'm not sure how clearly you can see the images. However, I'll walk through them. On the left-hand side, the first evasion technique used is anti-research checks. This is used, it was mentioned by me in the anti-virtualization and anti-sandbox category. Here we can see a list of processes that Legion Loader checks for. It checks to see if they're running at the moment that it was executed as well. If any of them are running, then the malware will crash and not run, and then either the automated analysis machine or the analyst won't able to see any action performed by this malware. The malware also performs several registry checks, which are anti-VM registry checks. It checks very specific registry entries that belong to virtual machines. And on the right-hand side, and I think this is a bit difficult to see, the malware also uses living off the land. It uses obfuscated PowerShell in order to run commands and download additional malware. It's hard to see here, but the malware is calling cmd.exe, which is a common Windows tool, to run additional commands. The next example I'd like to discuss, and this is very different from Legion Loader, is a malware called Sapar. This is a pretty long-lived credential stealer. It was first seen in the wild in 2013, and since then it was seen multiple times, and actually it was seen again really recently in February 2020, targeting organizations in South Korea. The campaign that was seen now, last month, is believed to be by North Korean attack groups. In the attack that we analyzed of this information stealer, it uses living off the land attack mechanisms, and it is a very, very good example of malware that is almost 100% based on living off the land. I'll provide more details right now in the next slide. But first of all, the risk of this is also very obvious, since this is a credential stealer. It can steal credentials from any affected organization, and then this can lead to additional compromise, because if any passwords are stolen, it could be either passwords specific to users or to a network. Then additional malware can use these passwords and then run and infect additional places in the network. At the time we analyzed the attack, we saw that it already affected hundreds of different organizations. So also the spread of this is very, very quick, and it can affect lots of organizations. Now I'd like to dive in a bit to the evasion techniques used by this malware, and it was a very good example of a living off the land malware. The malware was based, I'd like to go back to the previous slide. Again, the malware was based on script to execute. You can see that in the third stage of its execution, it used a VB script to execute, and then that called a batch script, which then called another batch script, The second batch script was the main payload, which had the main malicious logic of this attack, and that's what I'd like to focus on in this slide. Here is the main batch script that was used in the attack, and I'd like to focus on specific parts of this script. We can see that at the beginning, when the script starts to run, it abuses some built-in Windows tools in order to set itself up and start collecting data. It uses NetSH in order to set the firewall and actually turn it off. And then it uses ipconfig in order to collect network information on the computer that it is currently attacking. Once it has that, it performs additional actions, and it executes 2 exe files that are downloaded by the malware as well. These exe files, they have a PDF icon, so unsuspecting users, they can think those are PDF files. However, they are executables. And these run email and browser password dumps by Security Exploded. It's important to point out these are both tools that can be downloaded by anyone. You can search online for email and browser password dumps by Security Exploded, and you'll find them. They are not exactly legitimate tools, but they could be used for password recovery, and they can also be used in exactly the same way for password theft, which is what we see here. Once this is done, the malware performs some additional actions, and then it wants to upload the stolen credentials and the ipconfig information onto its servers. For that, it uses an FTP client, which is called NCFTP. This is a legitimate FTP software provider. And this is used in order to upload all the data to FreeHostia, which is a well-known and widely used hosting service. So you can see throughout this whole attack chain, the malware is only using either built-in tools or well-known tools which can also be used for legitimate purposes. These are called dual-use tools. And it's important to look out for these tools and monitor them because they could be used for legitimate purposes inside your organization, but they can also be used and are being used by attackers in order to perform their own purpose. The next example I'd like to provide is a miner. This is a very sophisticated and fileless miner that Deep Instinct caught in one of its customer sites. As you can see in the image, the miner uses many types of living off the land tools and additional evasion techniques. For example, it uses PowerShell for execution, and it also sets a scheduled task to run itself. And in addition, it uses, through PowerShell, reflected PE loading in order to further evade security products. The risk of this, first of all, it's a miner, and miners abuse the computing power of whatever computers they infect. In the event that these miners attack servers in the organization, it could cause serious damage because other tasks run by these servers could be stopped or slowed down. However, there is a bigger thing to point out here. Miners might not be malicious. Miners might not harm your organization that much. It depends where they land. However, the fact that they attacked you means that there is a backdoor into your organization, and an attacker doesn't have to keep this malware as a miner. The purpose can be changed, and then it could turn into spyware or ransomware, and then the organization that had a miner before could now be vulnerable to potentially a much more serious threat. This malware used many different types of evasion techniques. I'd like to focus on 2 of them. The first is a scheduled task that runs at system startup. This task is set up by a PowerShell script. You can see here the scheduled task that runs the next stages of the miner whenever the system starts up. And then the malware also has in PowerShell a reflective PE loader, which allows it to load PE into memory, and this is based on PowerSploit and PowerShell Empire frameworks. What this does is decode base64 encoded content, which is present in the registry. This was also put in the registry by the miner. And then it is injected into running processes. This is a very advanced evasion technique because though there is a PE file here, there is nothing really present in the file system because all the content is encoded in the registry. And then it is injected into memory. So in order to detect it, you either have to scan the registry for suspicious content, which is something which can be very difficult, or you have to monitor computer memory and detect suspicious actions there. I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation that this game of evasion is a cat and mouse game between security solutions and malware actors. Basically, as security solutions enhance their behavioral and static capabilities, attackers have to innovate to bypass them, and the opposite is also true. Attackers also innovate and find new ways to attack, and then security solutions have to make sure they are up to date and able to block these new types of threats. I'd like to go over some trends that we saw in the past year and also longer than that in regards to evasion techniques and their change over time. The first is that cyber criminals are adopting techniques which were once mostly or only used by nation-state actors. This is something I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. An example for this is living off the land attack techniques and also more advanced anti-analysis techniques. This is in general because the whole cyber criminal infrastructure and malware authors, they are becoming more and more sophisticated, and they are driven by higher financial gain, which then makes them improve. The second point, which is very related to the first point, is that attacks are becoming more targeted, and because of that, they include specific recon and information collection on targets. This is something that is obviously done by nation-state actors, but it's also being done more and more by cyber criminals. We can especially see it with advanced ransomware. In many attacks in the past year, ransomware, the more advanced ransomware campaigns such as Ryuk or Sudinokibi have focused on very high-profile targets on big companies. And in order to successfully attack these companies, they first, either through their own malware or through different malware campaigns that they work together with, collected information on this target. Information can be credentials or how the network is built, where the servers are located, anything that could make their attack much more effective and make the chances of ransom being paid higher. The third trend that we saw is that attacks are split into several components. This is mostly a dropper, which can then drop multiple different payloads based on different parameters chosen by the attacker. This could be, for example, the location of the infected system, the geolocation, if it is in Europe, if it is in the US, or in Asia. It could be the types of processes that the dropper sees that are running on the computer that it just infected. If it suspects that this is a bad computer to infect, either based on the security solution on it, or it might be a virtual machine, then the malware can either not drop anything or drop something that is less critical to the attackers. That way, the attackers split their tools, and if one tool is burned, then it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole infrastructure is burned, and the other malware used by the same attacker can be used to attack different organizations and also maybe be used in different campaigns. The fourth trend that relates to evasion techniques used by malware is that prominent malware campaigns, for example, Emotet, which is the most prominent malware probably of the past year, is the use of custom packing by malware actors in their samples. This means that there is no reliance on known packers, which might be easier to detect. And simpler security solutions would have a problem with this because packing changes the patterns inside the malware, inside the malicious file. And if there is a security solution that is based on signatures or on detection of specific patterns inside the malicious file, it will have serious problems in detecting files that are packed, and especially files that are custom packed. The last trend is the combination of several evasion techniques in one campaign. This sums up all the previous points because we see attackers which are not using only one thing or only one evasion technique, but multiple evasion techniques in order to make both evasion and analysis much more difficult. I'd like to now talk about a few ways to protect yourself and your organization from malware in general and from more advanced malware, for example, malware that uses evasion techniques. The first thing you should look at is that you use an endpoint protection solution that is using a multi-layered approach, meaning it can prevent threats through multiple mechanisms. For example, you could use a security solution that has static scanning and a cloud and some behavioral methods as well. It could be also different layers of protection. However, the solution must have several layers in order to have a higher chance of preventing more sophisticated threats, which can attack through different methods and different areas of the operating system. The second point you should make sure of is that your solution is based on deep learning, because through that it is able to anticipate new evasion attempts and block them, even if they were never seen before. This is due to the predictive nature of deep learning. The third point is that you should make sure your solution is able to deal with advanced evasion techniques. This is, it can be done through many methods. However, it's often done through the use of behavioral mechanisms. And the fourth point, which I would really like to stress, is that the solution should be prevention-based. This is because in many cases, detection of an attack will mean that your response will be too late. I'd like to provide a simple example for this, and a very obvious one. If you're attacked by ransomware and you're using a detection-based solution which only detects and doesn't prevent, then of course it doesn't help you to deal with the ransomware, because ransomware is not there to hide under the radar. If you're attacked by ransomware, you'll know very, very quickly that you were attacked, and then detection is no longer helpful. However, if the ransomware was prevented before it could run, then that would save you a lot of time and a lot of money. This is also true in the case of other malware like spyware. Spyware can start acting very quickly and steal your credentials and then compromise you later using these credentials. However, if the solution is prevention-based, then the malware won't get the chance to even start stealing your credentials in the first place. I'd like to provide as an example a quick overview of Deep Instinct product and of its multi-layered structure. There are several stages in which the product scans files and checks if they are malicious. The first stage is pre-execution, meaning that the files here are scanned even before they are executed. So in the case they are prevented, they can do no harm at all to the computer that they were downloaded to, because they did not execute yet. This is made up of several components. The first is deep static analysis, which scans a wide variety of file types. And this prevents most of the threats using deep learning. it is able to prevent them very, very quickly and to also predict on new and unseen threats so that you are not only protected from known malware, but also from malware that was not yet seen in the wild. The second mechanism that is used in this stage is a cloud mechanism, which is based on file reputation. This includes both malicious and benign files and is an additional layer of protection on top of the static analysis. And then there are also additional mechanisms of script control and blacklisting in the specific cases where this is wanted by customers. The second stage is on execution. So in the rare event that the pre-execution stage did not prevent the malicious file that is running, the product also includes on-execution stages. This is a very good example of the multi-layered protection that I mentioned in the previous slide. The first is behavioral analysis. This includes behaviors that are highly suspicious, such as code injection, enhanced ransomware protection, which monitors specific activities which are highly indicative of ransomware, and also protection from shellcodes. This provides a protection on execution, meaning if the malware managed to execute, then it will still be prevented very, very quickly before it can perform malicious actions. In a future version of the product, we will also add automatic threat hunting and response capabilities. And then the product also has post-execution options, which are related not to prevention, but to provide information on the event that happened in order to save time to companies that use this product and make it very clear to them what attacked them. This includes several components. For example, threat classification, which is based on deep learning, the analysis of the attack chain of the malware, and automatic remediation whenever that is necessary, though in most cases, files are prevented, so there is no need to remediate. As I said throughout the presentation, all the content covered here, including all the evasion techniques and all the malware samples that I provided examples for, all of this is covered in our blog. So if you'd like to know more details, you're welcome to visit our blog and read all of this content and additional content there. Thank you very much for listening to me today. I hope it was interesting. And if you have any questions, then they can be sent through the Q&A.
Thank you, Guy. This is Eric. So before we begin with today's Q&A, please direct your attention to our webinar survey available in the right-hand presentation window. If you close the survey, you can reopen the widget by clicking the icon along the bottom of your screen. Thank you in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your response helps us better serve you. And now on to the question and answer portion of our event. As a reminder, to participate in Q&A, just type your question into the text box located to the right of the presentation window, or click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If we can't get to all the submitted questions today, we'll be sure to share them with Guy, who can reply to you offline. And just a reminder that Guy is an expert in malware evasion techniques. This is your opportunity to ask him questions that are important to you or to your corporation. So please, hopefully you'll take part in this. It's not often that you have these opportunities, but we do have a question or two, so I will read those now. Guy, the first question is, are all of these evasion techniques actually effective against security solutions and analysis?
Thanks for the question. Well, the answer is yes, they are all effective against security solution and also against analysts. They can really hinder the ability of some security solutions to detect malware. And even in the case that they are detected, some evasion techniques make malware very, very hard to analyze, and some automated systems might not be able to analyze them, or some analysts might also not analyze them because it would just take too long to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. I have another question here, and that goes, how does malware get access to computer memory to run an injection attack? What makes people most vulnerable to this type of injection?
So first of all, actually the answer to this question is a bit long, so I'll give a short answer, and I'd like to direct the people who asked this to the blog where there is a longer answer for this. Malware can gain access to computer memory either through exploiting weaknesses, which is, it can happen, but it's rare, or through using techniques which are well known, such as some of the techniques I discussed, such as DLL injection or reflective injection. These techniques, if you follow a certain protocol, you can call it, give you access to the memory of the computer and make you able to attack through there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Guy. On to the next question, if you're ready. Is there a general ranking from easy to hard to pull off for each of the attacks that you went over, and which are most successful usually? Do you have an idea of that?
If you are talking about the evasion techniques that I presented in the beginning of the presentation, there is no real ranking of them, but as a very general rule, I can say that the ones that are only in memory and not based on saving files to disk, they are the more difficult to implement and also the more difficult to detect. However, also inside these techniques, there are different difficulty levels. I can discuss this more offline with whoever asked this because, again, it's a long answer if I will go through each of the techniques.
Okay, appreciate that, Guy. Okay, so we have another question here, and this question reads, exactly how does Deep Instinct acquire a predictive capability to detect previously unseen malware? Guy?
Okay, this is a good question, but I can only partially answer it because some of it is related to confidential information, some of the company IP. But in general, through the use of deep learning, the product is able to understand what parameters and what combination of parameters might constitute a malicious file. This is both through the deep learning itself and through the way the data in which it is trained is organized. This is also something which is very, very important to the performance of the deep learning model. So it is able to recognize combinations of parameters and very, very specific parameters and behaviors which could relate to malware. And that is how it is able to detect malware which is previously unseen. This could be, you could get a bit tricky with this question and say that some of the parameters were seen before, which could be true. However, there are two important points to make here. One is that some of the parameters might have been seen before and some were not seen before in any malware. And the second is that many malware strains they could be highly similar and they could be very distant from each other and still share some similarities. However, they are still unknown malware and unseen malware. Okay,
great answer, Guy. The next question is, who are the different actors that you see using these techniques beyond the national actors you mentioned?
Okay, so this is there are many different actors using these techniques. As I said in the past, it was limited mostly to nation-state actors. However, now there are many malware campaigns which are using these techniques. I'll mention some of them. The most prominent are Emotet, it used to be financial malware and it turned into a botnet operator. It now infects computers and acts as a dropper to additional malware that the attackers have business connections with, and then they can agree with another malware operator to download specific malware as a second stage of Emotet infection. In addition, There is also malware called TrickBot. That's financial malware as well, which has been around for several years. It also uses many different types of evasion techniques. And there are also the examples I provided in the presentation. And to be honest, there are many, many different examples that can be provided. This is just the most common and the most prominent ones.
Great, thank you, Guy. Next question is, it spins it around a little bit. Do you know of any malware that is using machine learning to help find new vulnerabilities in new targets?
To be honest, we are following this, and I haven't come across malware that is in the wild and is using machine learning to attack. However, I believe personally that it's only a matter of time since the technology exists, and it's a matter of implementation. Okay,
thank you for that, Guy. Next question is a little long, but I think it's a good question. I'll read it to you, and I can read it again if you need. This one says, in a large organization that utilizes PowerShell for deployments, updates, and other tasks, how do you see customers addressing this attack vector? Also, are you expecting that the IT system administrator has an in-depth understanding of all the policies in place that are running? Okay?
Okay, that's a very, very good question. I have several answers. First of all, there is one important point that I didn't mention in my talk. Organizations that use any dual-use tool such as PowerShell or sysinternals should at least monitor where this tool is installed inside the organization so they can know if it is present in locations where they want it to be used or not. This is only the beginning of my answer. To answer if the personnel in the organization have to have an in-depth understanding of the policies that are running. So in an ideal world, my answer would be yes, but this means that the sysadmins have to be experts at this and have to invest a lot of time into looking at these types of events. In the next version of the Deep Instinct product, we will introduce something that actually answers this question. It is a more sophisticated script engine, which, based on the behavior or specific parameters in the script, can classify the script as malicious, suspicious, or benign. And this takes much of the load off of the system administrator. Of course, it's still recommended that the administrator has a good grasp of what goes on inside the organization, including the PowerShell that is being run there. However, the use of this capability in our next product version will take a lot of the load off of the personnel by providing them with answers on all of these events.
Great. Thank you, Guy. Fantastic answer. And that was a great question as well. Those are all the questions we have, Guy. Do you have any closing statements for the audience?
I'd just like to say that in these very strange times, I hope everyone is doing well and stays healthy. Thank you for listening to me.
All right. Thank you, Guy, and thank you to the audience. That's all the time we have for today. And thank you, Guy. Deep Reading appreciates your time and expertise on today's topic. And thank you to our sponsor, Deep Instinct, as well as to everybody in the audience once again. We appreciate your attention and participation. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been available to listen to the event. And again, if you have any further questions that came in while I was reading this, then Guy will have access to them and can answer you directly. And this webinar is copyright by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Dark Reading and Deep Instinct, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of Deep Instinct and our guests, I'm Eric Bruno. Thanks for your time, and have a great day.